And welcome back, fellow CyberCon 2020 attendees. Jay and Chris here, hosts of the most listened to, the most influential, and the most popular podcast that we're aware of anyway, the Just Us Nerds podcast. We are back for our next segment in our panel of power, where we are interviewing legends from the comic book industry, as well as some rising stars.
Remember, just a reminder, if you're enjoying what you're seeing, show some appreciation by donating to either the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. The link is going to be available on the page, or the Second Harvest Food Bank that we're having right down. If you look down on our Facebook page, we'll have that. And not without further ado, our next guest.
Thank you, Chris. So, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, J.M. DeMatteis was a professional musician and rock music journalist before entering the comic book field. DeMatteis has a career as a storyteller spanning 3 decades in various media. He has written for almost all of the major companies, as well as achieving claim for original graphic novels. His work has earned him some of the highest recognitions in his craft, including comics' highest honor, the Eisner Award, which he won for Justice League International, and having his autobiographical Brooklyn Dreams picked by the ALA as one of the 10 best graphic novels and book list. His success in the comic book medium has led DeMatteis to work in both television and movies. Mr. DeMatteis seeks to inspire and teach other writers through his Imagination 101 workshop and his story consultation service, Creation Point. As I was writing this intro, I realized that his accomplishments are so numerous that they cannot be adequately represented by a brief bio. Suffice to say, Mr. DeMatteis is one of the music makers, and he is one of the dreamers of dreams that help make this world a little bit brighter through stories that inspire and fill us with wonder. Please join me in welcoming back for his 4th appearance on the Just Us Nerds podcast, Mr. J.M. DeMatteis.
Yeah. Come on. There he is.
Okay, now I'm here. Let's try it again. That was a great.
I
just wanted to thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, I forgot to put you in the stream. Sorry.
That's okay.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Like you said last time, you're like, oh, okay, I've got an intro. That's a great intro. I'm out. I'm done.
Right. I was going to say the same thing again. You can't top an intro like that, so I should really just shut up and you guys keep talking. You know.
Oh, it's a pleasure that we've been able to have you on as many times. I feel like you're very slowly, believe it or not, you are being assimilated into the show, much like kind of like the Borg collective. We are slowly assimilating you into the show.
Resistance is futile. I understand. Yeah.
Resistance is futile. And oh wait, we lost JM's feed. Where'd he go? That was him dropping out. Today, I was hoping that we could kind of in our interview, we've talked to you numerous times about different projects, both current and present. And today I was kind of hoping we could kind of take a little trip down memory lane with you, kind of starting at kind of the beginnings of your career and kind of slowly bringing us up to present. So we're going to hop in that old DeLorean and travel back to the year 1987.
1987?
When I was only 7 years old. It was an amazing time.
So 9-year-old Jay, I'm still recovering from the emotional scars of the death of Optimus Prime. Yeah. And then you, Mr. DeMatteis, you have your first 2 television writing credits for a couple of shows that our audience might know, the Real Ghostbusters, and then also the new Twilight Zone. So I know from previous discussions that we've had that you were a fan of the original Twilight Zone. What was that like for you, being able to write for a revival of that series?
You know, yeah. If I'm making a list of my favorite TV shows of all time, Twilight Zone, the originals, is undoubtedly number 1.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of extraordinary. And in retrospect, it's more extraordinary than it was when it was happening. Do you know what I mean? When I stop and I think, wow, my first credit was Twilight Zone. That's pretty
Right?
cool. And that happened really through the good graces of a guy named Alan Brennert, who's a wonderful writer, novelist, TV writer. He's also written some classic comic books along the way. I don't mean classic comics, I mean classic stories. And you know, I didn't know Alan, but I knew of his name from working in comics. It was just the beginning when I was trying to get in the door in TV. And this is a really good lesson for anyone out there, that you always have to keep knocking on the door until the right person answers. And I just wrote an email. No, there was no email. I wrote a letter. Remember letters?
1987.
It was typed on a typewriter. You know, remember that?
What?
Yeah, those strange magical. I had a typewriter that was an IBM Selectric typewriter, and because it had a 2-line memory, it could remember 2 lines worth of copy, which I bought in the 80s. It cost $2,000. So I typed on a nice letter to Alan on my IBM Selectric typewriter, and somehow got through. I don't know how I found the right address or whatever. Long story short, I got to submit to the show. I submitted a few stories. They picked one. I worked on it. I sold them the script. They went out for the filming. I had an incredible time. It was just mind-blowing, and they canceled the show. And it turned out they waited they canceled it in the fall or something, and that summer they ran off the rest of the episode. So my episode finally aired the following summer. But it was an amazing experience. It was an amazing experience to be on the set and watch the actors and hear someone speak your lines. And, you know, it's TV, so things were rewritten. And I remember in the beginning, it's like, well, I didn't write that. And all of a sudden they were speaking my lines. And I was like, I could have wept on the spot, you know? And a little bit of trivia, Marty Pasco, very well-known comic book writer, was a staff writer also on The Twilight Zone, along with Alan Brennert. Yeah. So, and he's the one that I think did the rewriting work on that script. So it was a great way to dip my toe into TV. And I don't remember if it was while I was out there. I might have that I got connected with Straczynski. Joe Straczynski was the story editor on Ghostbusters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's right.
So same thing. I pitched him some stories. He liked one. I wrote it, and there it was. I had never written for animation before. I didn't really know that much about it either. And but that was my first animation credit, and it was a fun show. And you know, he's such a talented writer. He was a great editor on that show, and he really understands story like nobody's business. So those are 2 great starting credits for me, and both in different ways, you know, really kind of resonate with who I am and what I do.
Well, and I can tell you that, you know, Ghostbusters, that was the first series growing up that I had to watch religiously. So that was my first where I'm like, I need to go home. Like, Ghostbusters is going to be on in 10 minutes.
That's funny. That's funny.
So, yeah. So like for me, I'm like, oh wow, I'm like, oh my God, you know. So yeah, I'm trying not to.
What made this podcast really such a treat for us, because we're getting to connect. You know, we had talked earlier with very talented artist Jim Fern, who's written for both Marvel and DC, and I was kind of gushing.
Oh, Jim Fern did back when I was writing Dr. Fate. He did a couple of Dr. Fate stories for us back then. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, I was just gushing to him about how one of his first books that he had done fill-in art for was Transformers book, which the Transformers were my introduction to comic books. So it's just such a treat when we get to talk to people like yourself, where you have, whether or not you realized it, you made a connection with us in our childhood that is just, so it's so amazing.
You know, it's a great thing. It's taken me years to get accustomed to the fact of seeing like a grown-up person walk up to me and go, "I've been reading your stuff my whole life." You know, now if you're a grown-up and you've been reading my stuff your whole life, how old does that make me? Wait a minute. You know, I feel like I'm 25. I don't understand how you've been reading my stuff your whole life.
So now the episode that you wrote for Ghostbusters was Devil in the Deep.
Devil in the Deep, yeah. It was about New York's water supply being haunted by undines and all kinds of strange creatures. Yeah.
So did that have like any kind of like H.P. Lovecraft kind of a nod? I mean,
well, you know, anytime you have some sort of strange creature rising from the deeps, there's always a nod to Lovecraft in there somewhere. You know, I'm sure I just thought, you know, what haven't they done yet? And thought about, okay, well, and I have, you know, a lot of books on various mystical things. things, and I must have just flipped to water undines and things. I thought, perfect, we'll haunt the New York water system.
And of course you're a New Yorker. You're originally
Yeah.
from Brooklyn. And I'm surprised it didn't hit me now, but isn't like something that people like to complain about is the quality of the water in certain places, or is that a thing?
It wasn't a thing when I was growing up. We never actually. The joke is that really the reservoir for New York City's water is upstate. Mm-hmm. So technically, I think that story was probably wrong, but it worked within the context of the story.
Got it. And
I think they found a way to get into the water supply one way or the other without getting into the reservoir, I guess is what it was. But, I'm thinking about it too, in terms of, Twilight Zone being such a huge influence on me. And then a movie like Ghostbusters really has a lot in common with JLI, doesn't it? Because on one level, it's a very straight adventure.
Yes.
The adventure part of that is taken very seriously.
Yes.
And yet it's played with so much character humor. And it's really very similar to what we did with JLI.
Yeah, absolutely. And the chemistry is so integral to what makes those stories so enjoyable. If you just had it be with a story where just Peter Venkman is the lead, or in JLI, for example, if it's just Blue Beetle, but you don't have Booster Gold or Batman for him to react off of, it's not nearly, I think, as entertaining a story.
It's all about the chemistry. It's all about the chemistry between the characters. I always say it's the characters that lead us. We never said, Beetle and Booster, great team. There happened to be a scene where Keith threw them together. I got them talking and something clicked and we all kind of started following that. So they lead us. Those characters take on a life of their own on the page and they lead us along the way.
I would think that's very helpful as a writer when that happens.
Oh, that's the best. That's what you always hope for. When the story takes over and you're sitting there going, you're typing, I didn't know that was going to happen. That's the greatest thing, to be totally surprised by your own story. Then the readers are going to be surprised.
Fantastic. Well, so let's fast forward now. So now we're up to 1991. And,
oh, so what am I, 10 or 11 now? Yeah.
So
I was such a smart kid. It's really unbelievable when I look back.
It's amazing. You are a wunderkind, if you're comfortable with that term. So at this point, at 10 years old, you're writing for the Superboy TV show.
Right.
One boy to another. I get it.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that. Tell me how that. So how do we get to this point? Take me up to this point.
So that came about because Mike Carlin and Andy Helfer at DC were the liaisons for that show. They were the guys that looked over the scripts and gave notes for DC. Mm-hmm. And Stan Berkowitz, who was the producer on the show, who went on to become a really good friend of mine, he was looking for new writers. And Andy and Mike knew I had written for television, so they recommended me. I had a conversation with Stan and pitched him some stories. He worked out a story, and I wrote my first episode. He liked the episode so much, it turned out that they were prepping the next season, so he invited me to come down. They were filming in Florida, at Universal in Florida. And he invited me to come down. I spent 6 weeks in Florida working on staff, helping them prep scripts for the new season. So I ended up writing 5 episodes and being on staff for a short period of time as well.
Wow. And so for you as a writer and someone who had written superheroes at that point, is there really a difference for you when you're writing them for television versus when you're writing for a comic book? I mean, obviously there's more of there's limitations of each. Could you speak a little to that?
It's the form. The story is story. Whichever way you go, a good story is a good story, and you can translate that to a novel, to a TV show, to a movie, to a comic, whatever. But the form is different. First of all, starting to write for TV, I had to learn the format. There's a real specific format to a TV script. So with any new thing, if someone's learning a comic book script for the first time, your conscious mind is spending half its time focused on the format, trying to get that right. I had taken a screenwriting course before I ever sold anything, so I had at least a sense of what the format was.
Right.
And then each medium has its strengths and its weaknesses. What's beautiful about comics is it's kind of a transitional medium because you can lean into the novelistic aspects of comics with very copy-heavy narration, however you want to go, or you can lean into the filmic aspects of comics and go really basic without captions, let the visuals tell the stories just through dialogue. You can do a lot of different things with comics, and that's what I really, really enjoy. And although in recent years we've seen a lot more TV shows lean into narration, for the longest time, narration, you didn't see a lot of narration on TV. It was a very rare and occasional thing. And still TV, it's really more about the visuals and the dialogue, and yes, you can do your voiceovers. But it's so you have to kind of take that story. It's almost like a different sort of, I don't know where I got this image. You're putting meat through a meat grinder, and it's got different, and then this grinder over here has totally different holes. So the meat gets fed, same meat, but it gets, this is a horrible metaphor, but it gets fed through.
I don't know.
It's fed through a different way.
That's kind of weird.
That may be the weirdest metaphor I've ever come up with, but you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. Or sometimes the way I look at it is, on stage, it's the same lights, but they have different filters for the lights. There's a blue filter or a green filter. It's the same story, but the filter is different. And the filter expresses that story differently. So you have to adjust things to fit the medium that you're expressing it in. But I got very comfortable in the TV format really, really quickly. It's a really, really fun format to work in.
So, well, speaking of that, a little birdie had told me that you had penned a script for a Daredevil movie.
I did. We never got, here's the story. We never got to the actual script. I wrote treatment. The treatment. So I had gone on and done some more television after that. I wrote for, there was a Gene Roddenberry thing called Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict, if anyone even remembers that. Yeah, I do. It's like Superboy. You mentioned the Superboy TV show to a lot of people, and they're like, there was a Superboy TV show? It was on for like 4 or 5 years. It's amazing. Yes,
there was. Two different Superboys. And
that's right.
Before we move on to Daredevil, just Sherman Howard's portrayal of Lex Luthor is, I believe, seriously underrated.
Oh, just between us and everyone else who's listening, he may be the best Lex Luthor ever. I thought he was phenomenal. He was an amazing, amazing actor. He's still out there doing stuff, I think. But I thought his Luthor was absolutely classic. I did a 2-parter called Know Thine Enemy, which is about Superboy. Luthor's about to basically wipe out the world, and Superboy's looking for a way to stop him, and he finds this disc which has all of Luthor's memories on it. So Superboy basically enters into Luthor's memory and lives out his life, looking for his weak spots and something in there that he could use to reach Luthor. And the acting in that one, it was one I learned a lot writing for Superboy, because I discovered that it doesn't matter if it's a great script. It has to be a great script merged with really excellent directing and really excellent acting. And I had, some episodes where I thought the script was strong, but other elements were weak. This one, I think I did a solid script, but the directing and the acting was so good, it lifted the whole thing up. So all the elements really cooked. And Sherman Howard, can't say enough good things about his Lex Luthor. Just he was fantastic. And that so many people don't know about it. Anyone out there that can just, it was during, I think, the last 2 seasons, because it really changed the last couple of years. They changed the whole tone of the show. And that was the version I wrote for. It was a little more adult, a little darker. And they had a different Luthor in the beginning also, a different Superboy, a different Luthor. The only one who was the same was Lana Lang. And Stacy, what was her last name? I don't remember. Stacy Hydick. Yeah, she was terrific. Anyway, check it out. Go seek out those later seasons especially. There's some really, really good episodes in there. So what were we talking about? Daredevil.
Daredevil.
So here's how Daredevil happened. I had pitched a movie to Chris Columbus's company, the director, producer, Chris Columbus, and sold the pitch. And I was working on this movie for him. Now, one of the things that some people know and some people don't about Hollywood is lots of scripts get commissioned and they're paid for, and for a variety of reasons never get made. Yeah. This was a script I was in love with. I loved working with those guys at Chris's company, and it never got made for whatever reason. But around the same time, while I was out in LA, someone introduced me to a director named Carlo Carlese, a director from Italy, very well known in Italy. He had just come to the States to start working on some American movies. And Carlo and I met, and it was one of those things where you meet somebody, you become instant best friends, and he's still one of my best friends on the planet to this day. And he, it turned out, was working for Chris as well. He was the director attached to Daredevil. and they had, excuse me, my allergies are really acting up today. Anyway, so they had been through a number of drafts of scripts on Daredevil, and no one was quite happy. Chris had done a script, Carlo had done a script, a few other people had done scripts. They wanted to bring in somebody with a fresh voice, and because Carlo really wanted me on it, Chris and his guys knew me because I was already working on a project for them. They brought me in. And so the only scripts I saw were Chris's script and Carlo's script. And I folded a lot of what they did into what I was doing and built out from there. Wrote several drafts of the treatment, which everyone was very, very happy with. And then, as happens, I think it was toward the end of the option on the character, and it went up the food chain at Fox, and whoever was up there read it and went, I don't want to spend money on the next option. Whatever reason, he wasn't excited about the treatment, or maybe they just didn't want to spend the money on the option. They thought they'd spend enough money. I don't know what it was. Right. But it was a great experience, and one of the best things that came out of it, aside from a friendship with Carlo that's lasted for decades, is that Stan Lee read the treatment and loved it.
Really?
And I came home one day and found a message on my answering machine, which, like an idiot, I didn't save. I can't believe I didn't save it. You look back at some stupid things you do, and I'm like, why didn't I save that?
Right. This is a message for J.M. DeMatteis.
Right, exactly.
And I think it's tops.
That's basically what it was. He said, "This is the best treatment of a Marvel character for film that I've read yet." Basically,
wow,
incredible. And at some point I called him back, and I had bumped into Stan in the office here and there, but he didn't know me from Adam, really. I don't think. And when I called this guy back, I felt like I was 12 years old again. I was like, "What? Hi, Stan. You like my story, Stan?" And some months, so the other nice thing that came out of that was some months later I was in LA and I got in touch with him and went out to lunch with him at the Brown Derby. Do you know the Brown Derby in LA? Yeah. This is like this classic showbiz restaurant. No, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. It wasn't the Brown Derby. It was better than that. It was the Friars Club, which is what all these old actors and comedians belong to. The Friars Club. You had to be in the club to get in. Mm-hmm. And now it's like the 90s. It's not the same Friars Club it once was, but it still was the Friars Club. So I'm thinking, I'm sitting in this place where like Jack Benny used to sit there and George Burns would sit there, and I'm sitting here with Stan Lee. And I was very cool through the whole lunch, but inside the 12-year-old kid in me was just doing backflips.
Wow.
It was great. It was really great.
What high praise. It
was fantastic. The only other thing that comes close in terms of comic book validation like that was when Amazing Spider-Man 400 came out, which was the death of Aunt May's story. And I came home one day, and there was a message on my machine from John Romita Sr. to tell me how much he loved the story and that it made him cry.
Oh, wow.
Is that fantastic?
Yeah. That is, I think you have to, I don't know. I mean, how do you not just stop working at that point? Because at that moment, I've peaked.
Yeah,
I can only go.
Well, here's how you don't stop working, because you still have a mortgage to pay, so you don't stop working.
Okay,
it's really simple. That's the basic rules of freelance life. There are bills to pay. You don't stop working.
True.
Yeah.
Do you? I don't know if you recall or could treat us to this if you remember, but I mean, now Daredevil has been imagined once in a feature film with Ben Affleck, and then again on Netflix with Charlie Cox. And I don't know if you've seen either of those, but I'm just wondering if you have, how did your treatment differ, if you remember, or can you share with us kind of any elements of your story? Do you remember kind of basic plots?
Well, it was Kingpin, it was Elektra, it was Bullseye. There were a lot of elements that I think carried over into the certainly the first movie.
Right.
So, on my website somewhere, buried back a few years, I put the whole treatment on my website. I'll see if I can find that link and I'll send it to you guys.
Oh,
so you can put it up out there so people can read it. It's I think it's in 3 parts on my website. I just figured, why not put the whole treatment out there?
See, these are the things that I wonder about. This is a strange question. I'm going off road again, and Chris will tell you I do that sometimes. But this is what I ponder. Like somewhere on your computer hard drive, is there is there a Word document like for Kraven's Last Hunt or for like one of your scripts for Daredevil? Is that just saved somewhere?
Here's the thing. Remember back in those days when I first started, first of all, Kraven's Last Hunt was written on a typewriter. So There we go. And other things, when computers first came in, we had all those floppy disks, which then became obsolete. And I remember one day years ago, I finally just tossed all the floppy disks. And I'm not someone who has printed out every copy and saved every copy of every script. So I have some things from over the years, but not many. One of my old Marvel editors, Eric Fine, recently was going through his files and found a bunch of Spider-Man stuff of mine from the 90s, and he sent me some plots and scripts and things, and the plot for the first Batman Spider-Man crossover that we did, things like that. But I don't have a ton of that stuff. I was really lucky when we just recently at Dark Horse did the new Moonshadow collection, the definitive edition of Moonshadow. Moonshadow, because it was such a special project to me, I saved almost everything. So we have so many great extras in the back of that book because that's one of the few things I didn't get rid of over the years.
That's so cool.
I had my original handwritten notes, from years before we ever did the project, things like that. And John J. Muth had his, original rough sketches and all kinds of wonderful things. But as a matter of course, I don't. In recent years, I have. I realized that it's probably good to hold on to some of this stuff. And but there's a whole gap, a whole bunch of things that I have never saved that probably, someone else out there might have a copy of, but I don't.
So in an animated series sense, you have had, and correct me if I'm wrong, because as we know on previous interviews, I have been wrong before. So, but when you're thank you, Chris. When writing animated series, you've had the opportunity to write Batman in an animated series, not once, but twice. Once in Justice League Unlimited, and then again in Brave and the Bold. And then
two Batman movies, Batman versus Robin and Batman Bad Blood, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Well, and I wasn't, no, wait, hang on, Chris, before you jump on me. I wasn't including those because they were movies.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, temporary redemption. My question for you is, can you describe for me the difference in writing for a show like Justice League Unlimited versus writing for like Batman the Brave and the Bold? So kind of if you could contrast the writing between those two.
Right.
There's really not a lot of difference. There really isn't, because there's always like carryover at Warner Brothers, so you're working with a lot of the same people. And even though the tones of the shows were different, I mean, Justice League Unlimited was as good a version of the Justice League as we've ever seen in print, on screen, anywhere.
Agreed.
That they didn't go to those guys and say, "Hey, write us a Justice League movie."
I know.
Is baffling to me. So the tone of that was clearly more serious, but there was still humor, lots of humor in the show as well. It was very character based. It was really packed. That's the show that got me back into animation, because I had done that Ghostbusters thing years before, and that was just a fluke to me. I honestly wasn't that interested, which sounds funny now that I have such a long career in it. I wasn't that interested in writing for animation. I was more focused on live action. And what happened was Stan Berkowitz, who I mentioned before, see, it all ties together, who was the producer on the live action Superboy. When Superboy was over, I had been approached by, we bring it back to Marty Pasco again. Marty Pasco was a story editor on the 90s Spider-Man animated show.
Okay. Yeah.
He approached me about doing some work for that. And I happened to mention to him, because Superboy had just wrapped, that I had Stan Berkowitz, this great friend who's a fantastic writer. Oh, plug me into Stan. Stan started working on Spider-Man and went on to this Emmy-winning animation career. He worked on all those Warner shows. Yeah. And just an amazing writer and a great guy. And so then time passes, and Stan is working on Justice League Unlimited. And Stan calls me up and says, "Do you want to do one of these?" And it was as simple as that. And I thought, oh, why not? Why not? And it turns out it was Alan Moore's For the Man Who Has Everything. Was the first one I did.
Oh.
Yeah, which I always say happily, I don't think I had read. So I didn't know the whole aura and mythology, this towering story that everyone revered. It was like, they sent it to me. I read, oh, this is a cool story. Let's go. And the other fun story about working on that episode was I turned in the first draft. And, usually you're going through 3 or 4 drafts on a script. And I turn in, we go through, first you go through the treatment and you work all the story details out in the treatment and you rewrite that a few times. And so I turned in the first draft of the actual teleplay, and time goes by and I don't hear anything back. And I'm thinking, I have totally screwed this up. They're never going to hire me again. I just completely screwed it up. So I called Stan and I said, I never got notes for the second draft. Oh, no, she did a great job. It was perfect. That, let me say that rarely to never happens. Even when it's a great script, there are notes and you're going through drafts. It just works that way. So that was like, really? So I'm thinking this is the way it's going to work all the time. So I get the second one from them, which, despite the fact that I've written Justice League and team books and things, writing team stories is very complex and complicated. And the more characters you put in, the more complex it gets. And the second story I got featured just about every Justice League character there ever was. It was Professor Ivo's android was coming back to Earth to get Luthor, and every hero had to come out to stop him. And oh my God! And it was like I had to juggle all these characters. But in the back of my head, I'm thinking, well, I get it. I guess first draft. No, there were plenty of drafts of that script. So I was disabused of that notion very quickly. So, but I loved working on that show. And again, it's kind of what I said before. It's all story. So the tone of Brave and the Bold was a little lighter. Batman was a little bit lighter. They could get funnier, and it had more in common with the sort of late 50s, early 60s Batman. But at the same time, they consistently gave me some of their darkest stories. I did the story with the Doom Patrol, where they all died at the end.
Yeah.
I did the story where Red Tornado created a son.
Yes.
And the son goes bananas, and Red Tornado basically has to pull the plug on his son. And I'm thinking there are kids who were 6 years old then that are probably still having nightmares about these stories. So some of the stuff skewed pretty dark within that tone. So there were places where both of those shows met, and there were places where both of those shows were different. But in essence, it's all about story. You're focusing on story.
Yeah.
And one of the other fun things about Brave and the Bold was that I got to do a couple of JLI-related episodes.
Yes.
Which was really fun.
I was hoping you'd talk about that.
Yeah, and so that was great. And I also got to do, there was a Guy Gardner Green Lantern episode where I got to do the one punch from our Justice League, which was great. I had Nort in there, and Guy Gardner and Batman, and I forget who else was in it. So that was really fun. There was something else I was going to say, but it's left my brain. It's okay.
Well, perhaps it'll come back. That's one thing that I enjoyed about the Brave and the Bold was that even though the tone was lighter, Batman was never, he was still treated with a certain kind of, I don't know if reverence is the right word.
Respect, certainly respect, yeah.
Yeah, he was never the butt of the joke. If anything kind of funny about the way he was portrayed, you always seem to write him as more of like, 1950s Batman, Dudley Do-Right sort of persona.
Yeah.
It was, I think it was more the style of the adventures than the portrayal of the character. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it was the context that you put him in. The same way that Batman could walk into JLI and still be Batman, but fit in the tone of that book, playing the straight man who would just occasionally, was that a joke? Did Batman just make a joke?
Right.
That was always a fun thing to do with him.
He does the one line,
And you're never quite sure, was that a joke? Was he being serious?
Right.
And no one ever knows, and he'll never admit it.
Now going on with kind of the Bat family, another character that you've had an opportunity to write a few times now in the DC animated is Damian Wayne.
Right.
So you wrote him in Bad Blood and in Batman versus Robin, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Now he's a totally different Robin compared to
And I wasn't, again, what happens a lot with these things, I don't know everything there is to know about all these universes. So I knew Damian Wayne existed, but I didn't really know much else about them. So they send me a bunch of material to read so I get a sense of the character. And, my first thought is like, oh, Batman has a son? Really? But as I read the material, I really found the character fascinating. The interesting thing, though, is because of the kind of character that he is and the way he's portrayed, and then the way I started to write him in the script, he comes off much, even though he's still a kid, he comes off older than, what is he supposed to be, 10 or 11 years old. And I'm thinking in my head, even though I know on one level that that's what he's supposed to be, he feels more like he's 17, like an angsty, hormone-popping 17-year-old. And when I went to the premiere of the movie and the first time Damian opened his mouth, and it's like, oh God, he's a kid. I forgot he's really a kid. And it shocked me. It really shocked me. And, there's a scene in Batman versus Robin where they're having a fight, and they're going at each other pretty good, And it's like, wow, Batman, I don't know if you should be beating up this 10-year-old. However, you know, I always underscored I was trained by Ra's al Ghul, and I'm a master assassin, and I can, you know, do this and I can do that. But he's 10 years old. Oh my God, you know. And it's in a way, on the pages of a comic book, you can make that leap more easily.
Right.
And I think if you went over to live action, it would be really difficult to make that leap.
Yeah.
Really difficult. And animation kind of straddled both. But the first time the character spoke, and I realized, he's just a kid. It was a little shocking. But he's a fascinating character.
What was crazy, like I will say, the way that you had written him in those movies, I'd actually say mentally he's, you know, late 20s. I mean, 30.
That's just it. He's brilliant. He's like a super fighter. He's all this stuff.
He's been raised as an adult his entire life.
Right,
and then all of a sudden, like, no, you need to come back and kind of be a kid. And he's like, I don't have time for this.
Right. And yet at the same time, he is a kid. No matter how much you may educate him, whatever power he may have, he's still a kid. And the whole point of that story is he's still a kid who really wants his dad.
Yeah.
Really wants his dad. And that's the whole emotional glue that holds that story together.
Yeah.
And Batman as a father, maybe talk a little bit about that too, writing the character of Batman as a father, because this is I mean, someone who, I guess in some ways Alfred has always been sort of his role model for having a father, but that's a situation that we haven't, well, I want to say we haven't seen Batman in a lot. Granted, you know, the character of Damian's existed for a few years now, but could you talk a little bit about writing Batman as a father? Because as a parent, it really completely turns your life upside down and changes your dynamics. And so
it sure does.
Yeah.
And you know, it's an interesting split with Batman, because also think about Robin, the original Robin. He raised that kid.
Yeah.
And there's this whole split with the way the character is portrayed. He's the ultimate loner, you know, he doesn't want to be bothered with anybody, not even the other people in the Justice League, all this stuff. And yet he clearly has this thing for being a father figure. And if you think about it psychologically, it really makes sense. He lost his father. This is his chance to be for somebody else who's also lost something, what he never had, or what he only had for a very short time. And I'm actually just putting that together as we're talking. So psychologically, it makes great sense for the character, even though it seems like, what, Batman is going to be the worst father in the world. But that's the fun thing about the character in general. You talk about Brave and the Bold. You talk about the 60s Batman. You talk about the Frank Miller Batman versus the Denny O'Neil Batman. There's something different about all the portrayals. And you can bend these iconic characters to the left. You can bend them to the right. You can push them forward. You can pull them back. And there's something in their roots that always unites them, and yet you have the freedom to write them in different ways. I've written Batman as the psycho, and I have written Batman as the most compassionate character out there. One of the insights I had writing, I think it was a story I did called Going Sane, is that Batman's father was a doctor. And in essence, in my interpretation, what he's doing for Gotham is he's being a doctor to the city. Yeah. He's the healer for Gotham.
Yeah.
He's being what his father was, but in just a slightly different, slightly psychotic way. But what he's coming from is not a place of vengeance, not a place of psychosis. He's coming from a place of compassion, expressed perhaps in a slightly psychotic way. But to say that, you have to say that all the superheroes are slightly psychotic for putting on masks and running around doing this.
Yeah.
So it's all a matter of interpretation. So I like the Batman that is more balanced and more human. But I've also written the crazy Batman too, and he's kind of fun too to play with. And yet they're both Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, and people have dimensions, and they're different people at different points in their life and different situations. So it is possible for someone to be all of those things.
Yes, absolutely. That's what being human is about. I'm talking to you. I'll go, when we're done, have a conversation with my wife, which will have a very different tone and flavor, because who I am with her is not who I'm going to be with you guys, and who I'm with somebody else, and it's true of us, so obviously it's true of our fictional creations. Yeah. We're very deep, aren't we?
We are so deep. Well, one before we get out of this, just one. I think the whole concept of Batman, the quote unquote loner, wanting to create this family. There's all kinds of kind of deep needs that people have that maybe they don't want to admit that they have, but that they're still there.
Yes.
And they still express themselves unconsciously. So as much as maybe as a conscious awareness that Batman has, that I don't ever want to go through the trauma of losing someone ever again. So I'm just going to be completely devoid of any human relationships. As much as he might like to say that, that basic need for connectedness is still there.
Yes.
And it's manifest through this pseudo family that he's created for.
Yeah. And you know, through that family, through the Batman family, and through the Justice League, and all these things, he doesn't need to be in the Justice League. He doesn't need to bring Dick Grayson into his life, but obviously he does need to, and it's as much or more his need as it is the need of the people around him.
Yeah, and what I've always liked is if you notice, like each one of the kids, he's had to deal with something just a little bit different. So
Right.
like they all have kind of the same background, but like raising Dick was different from raising Jason, and then the loss of Jason, and then the difference with Tim, and now with his actual blood son, Damian.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
and it's kind of funny, like you had written something, and Damian and Batman are having this conversation, and he kind of like snaps back at him something that he would have said himself. And you kind of look and he goes, "Oh, he is my kid." It's kind of one of those things where he looks and he goes, "Oh yeah, you are my."
Oh yeah,
child."
when your kid mirrors you back, and not necessarily in the best way, those are always like. I was having a little Twitter chat with my daughter the other day, and she was being very snarky, lovingly snarky. And I realized, oh yeah, that's my daughter. She got that from me.
Well, taking it out of the deep discussion and bringing it more into just some fan service discussion. You've had an opportunity to work for both Marvel and with DC. There have been. I'm sorry. Would you say, Chris?
Because he wrote the Spider-Man and Batman.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did Spider-Man, Batman for Marvel, and Batman, Spider-Man for DC. I got to do both of them, which was really amazing. I don't know if that's ever happened before, that one person wrote the same crossover of both companies.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think so. I remember that there was because even they had a Punisher Batman and Batman Punisher, but I don't believe that they were done by the same writer.
And I think that was because I'd worked with both companies and they knew me well, so that might have had something to do with it. Yeah, it was fun. That was really fun.
So there have been some rumblings online about in a move to try to reinvigorate the industry, especially post-pandemic. It's hit the industry very hard. About the idea of having another intercompany crossover. So my question to you is that what you've had opportunities to write some of these matchups. What's a matchup you haven't had a chance to do, or is there a matchup that you would like to revisit if given the opportunity to write? They give you a book. They can say you can have whatever book you want that's going to be part of this intercompany crossover. What's that book going to be?
Two things come to mind. One, actually, someone asked me this question recently, and I came up with one answer. But just as you're asking me, I thought of another one, which is even better. So the one that just popped into my head was to do it with Giffen and McGuire, and do JLI Fantastic Four. Fantastic Four has a tradition of having a lot of great humor from the character-based humor, and to put some of our characters, our JLI characters, together with the Fantastic Four and have some cosmic adventure and do it with Giffen and McGuire, that would be heaven on earth to do a project like that.
Yeah, I would love it, especially like Beetle and Reed, being able to, sit there and do their own version of Science Brothers, and
Guy Gardner and The Thing. I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Martian Manhunter and Sue can compare invisibility. They could get invisible together.
But like I could see like the Gardner and Thing, like they could start. I'm tougher than you. No, I'm tougher than you. And somebody be like, "Hey, didn't you get knocked out by the guy with no powers?" Like that, and you can bring that back. And
Human Torch and Fire.
Yeah,
I mean, there could be a lot of fun stuff happening there.
Oh,
and the truth is, you could do 48 pages of them in a room having a conversation. It would be the best thing ever.
All of them.
And it's probably one of those things that, like you say, it would start writing itself because you have such a familiarity. Well, I don't know. Have you ever written? Forgive my ignorance, but have you ever written?
No, I actually haven't. That's one of the things that when people ask me, "What would you like to do that you haven't done?" I'd love to do a Fantastic Four miniseries with Giffen and McGuire. It'd have to be with those guys.
Right.
I've written some of the individual characters. I've written the Thing. I've written Reed. I've written the Human Torch. But like in Marvel team-ups, back when I was writing Marvel team-up, these characters would show up individually. But I've never really written the Fantastic Four together. And I love the Fantastic Four. To me, still, the Lee Kirby Fantastic Four is one of the high points of comic book history and always will be. So to do those characters and do it with Keith and Kevin, I'd love to do that. So the other crossover that came to mind when someone else asked me, because I really, really love the supernatural corners of the DC universe. Yeah. And although they're not as deep, the supernatural corners of the Marvel universe. I mean, DC's universe really goes deep with supernatural characters. Yeah. Marvel has a bunch, but not quite what DC has. Right. So I thought, what about a Constantine Doctor Strange team? Bringing in, you know, Spectre and Brother Voodoo and all these other characters along with them, and doing a big supernatural crossover.
So, like. Or you can even throw in, like, you know, Mephisto's done something. And,
right.
And
then what do they have? DC has Neron, right? Isn't he sort of the mirror of Mephisto in the DC universe or something like it? There's a lot of different things you could play with. But I love those characters. I love Doctor Strange. I wrote Constantine in Justice League Dark, and also worked on the Justice League Dark movie, and then wrote the Constantine City of Demons, which was both a series on CW Seed and then expanded into a full movie. Which is another one of my favorite animated projects that I've ever worked on. So yeah, I would love to do a supernatural crossover between Marvel and DC. So a Marvel DC, if you're listening, when all the smoke clears and we're all back to normal life, both of those projects, I stake my claim.
Make it
they're
happen.
going to listen to me, right?
Well, your track record, I don't know. I think you hold a little bit of sway. So, well, if how about this? If a year from now we're talking about the Doctor Strange, Constantine, and JLI FF crossover, we'll know that we had a small part.
That's right. That's right.
The inception, if you will.
I'll send you guys free copies if it happens. How's that?
Yeah.
Oh God, I'm on camera now. I have to do it, huh?
That constitutes a legal and binding contract, sir. Okay. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Okay. All right.
Well, okay. So, as I'm sure maybe you're aware, there's been a lot of talk about what's happening with the comic book industry right now, and clearly, with the social distancing and the slowdown of just commerce in general, it's hitting the industry hard. And hopefully, I'm an optimist. I'm willing to bet that the comic book industry is going to survive this. But I'm just wondering, as someone who's worked in this industry as long as you have, what needs to change, if anything? Well, how does the world of comic books need to change? What do they need to start doing differently or better or if anything at all?
You know, there's a reason that I'm not sitting behind an executive desk at Marvel or DC, because I don't know. It also depends on how you define comic books. Or comic books, are we talking about, comic books, or are we talking about graphic novels, which is a whole other world where you have, graphic novels that have nothing to do with Marvel, DC, or any of those companies selling millions of copies in bookstores, where you could say the comic book is healthier than ever, whereas the traditional comic book is struggling more. So it really depends on where you put the lens. I will say this, that as long as I've been in the business, it's been the end of the business in some way. When I sold my first scripts in the late 70s, and it was like, we don't know what's going to happen. Warner Brothers could shut us down and just make underoos and reprint the comics, and they don't need us. And I hear that same story over and over again. And then when Marvel went bankrupt, and there's always something. Now this is a big something, but I'm with you. I'm an optimist. This too shall pass.
Yeah.
And we will come back. So I always feel that the best thing for comics is that comics have to be treated like any other medium, which means it ain't just one thing. Comics aren't just superhero stories or stories that have to take place in the Marvel universe or the DC universe. Yeah. You don't go to so I remember someone saying years ago, you don't go to the movies, and if you've seen Star Wars, expect every movie you see to be a science fiction movie like Star Wars. That's one kind of movie, and there's 100 different kinds of science fiction movies. So comics, and the subject matter has diversified over the years, much more, I think. But I think we need more of that. I think I've been on the bandwagon. It's borne out by how these books are doing in the bookstores for comics for young readers again, because those books in the bookstores sell really, really well. That's why I've done projects like Abadazad and The Stardust Kid and Augusta Wind, or the project I did last year for IDW, Impossible Incorporated, because I like doing all ages projects, because a really good all ages project is something that an adult can read with their kid, kind of like Brave and the Bold, and you can both really enjoy it. There are concepts and ideas and things happening in there that the adult will get one way, and there's an adventure in there that the kid will get another way, and there's emotions that hopefully everyone can relate to. So I think I think it was Madeleine L'Engle, and I'm gonna mangle the quote. She's the woman who wrote Wrinkle in Time, that whole series of books.
Yeah.
And she said something to the effect of, and I'm completely mangling the quote, but I'm getting the essence correct. Whenever I want to write something that is really, really dealing with really intelligent, deep concepts, I'll write a book for kids. Now, that's not the quote at all, but that was the meaning behind the quote. And when we're done, I'll look it up. She said it much better than that. But that's children's literature. The best children's literature runs very, very deep.
Yeah.
And it's magical, and it's imaginative, and it's filled with great concepts and great children's literature. If you have kids, you can read it with your kid, and you're loving it just as much as they are.
Right.
So I think, but I really think that the key to comics surviving is just to diversify more and more and more. And even within the superhero universes, I would really love to see, let's see new characters. I mean, really new characters from the ground up, not variations on the old characters.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
When they did the New 52 a few years ago, which was very successful, I'm not knocking it. But I would have loved to have seen them, if they were going to reboot that, really start from square one.
Right.
Or if you go back to what Julius Schwartz did in the 60s, he took the name The Flash,
Yes.
the basic power, and created something totally new.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that with Green Lantern, and they did that with Hawkman, and that was an interesting way to go. But also just wholly new characters, because how many times can you keep circling back to the same well of characters?
Right.
Right.
Create new characters, lots of new characters.
You're really talking about taking risks, is kind of what you're saying, because it's risky what you're proposing.
Right. And well, at a time like this is probably the time to take risks, I would think. It all depends on someone's point of view, I guess. No, things are really screwed up. We shouldn't take any risks. Or things are wide open. Things are unlike they have ever been before. Let's take some risks.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I said, I don't have an executive brain, and I'm not under the pressure these guys are under. And I don't have to deal with all the things that they have to deal with. So I'm not putting anyone down with any of this. I'm just spinning my wheels thinking, what would I like if someone said, and maybe they'd sit me behind a desk and I'd do all this, and I would be just the biggest failure in the history of comic book executives. Who knows?
Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing that question. So once all of this is over and hopefully life gets back to normal, what's on the horizon for you? So what is there anything that's coming up that you can talk about with us?
Oh yeah. Do you have any super secret stuff?
The super secret stuff I have, but I can't tell you about. I can talk about
secret stuff that you are able, like you remember the last conversation we had.
What did I give away last time?
It's funny. I think most of it you couldn't talk about.
Oh, see.
Okay, well,
I'm working on another animated movie for Warner Brothers right now, and I have a couple of comic book projects that are sort of on hold right now because of everything that's going on. Right. But out right now, how about that? Out right now, Superman Red Sun, the adaptation of Mark Millar / Miller's a classic graphic novel, really turned out really, really well. Really happy with the response.
I will just tell you, I saw this about a week and a half ago, and I want to tell you, like, when I read the comic, it was good. I liked it, but you gave it so much more emotion, because that character, the Superman character, I was like, I was like, okay, I get it. He landed a little bit later in the time, and the world spun a little bit more and ended up in Russia. But having that conversation with him as a kid, and where the other kids are chasing after him, and they're going through that, and there's that girl who, the girl defends him, and him finding out, and that was his turn, finding out later as her an adult where she ends up, and he's like, oh, okay, maybe things aren't exactly as they seem, and he sees, like, because it comes back to him on an emotional level, something like that. So I want to applaud, and that was
Oh, thank you. Well, we had phenomenal material to adapt. I keep saying when people ask me about this, whenever you go through that graphic novel, and it is just packed with, like, every page, there's like some other cool concept that Mark just throws out there, and then he's on to the next one. And it's just so there's so many wonderful ideas that we could pick and choose and pull things from. And then what happens when you do an adaptation? Things change because of the nature of the beast. An 80-minute movie, or an 85, however long it says, 80, 85 minutes, is not the same as a graphic novel. It's just not. And then you introduce one element, which is going to change another element. But what you hope, you can never going to make it detail for detail, because you don't want it to be detail for detail, because then why do it in the first place? What you want to do is be true to the essence of the story.
Yes, and you were. Like I said, it was fantastic.
Oh, thank
really
you.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was talking to my wife this morning. We were having a conversation about memory and the different ways we remember things, some events from our lives, and how the more time passes, the more maybe we remember them differently. But what you hope is to get, even if the details of the memory changes, that you're still holding on to the essence of that experience and what that meant to you. And it's the same thing with adapting a story. You want to make sure the essence of that story is intact. If you screw that up, then I think you've screwed up the adaptation. And I hope Mark is happy with it, that we were true to the essence of that story while changing details and kind of colorations along the way.
Right.
And the other thing I'll mention that's out now, animation-wise, anyone that wants to can download the CW Seed app.
Yes.
And Deathstroke, the animated series. The first batch of episodes is up there. Yep. And that turned out really, I am so happy with the way that turned out. Beautifully directed. All these things. I'm always amazed by the voice acting. When I heard in Red Sun that they got Jason Isaacs to be Superman, the top of my head blew off, you know. Diedrich Bader as Lex Luthor, just all the voice acting across the board. So good. Same thing with Deathstroke. They got
Michael Chiklis.
Mike, thank you. From The Shield, and who was the Thing, the perfect Thing in that Fantastic Four movie, you know? He was the embodiment of the Thing in those movies. He was so good. They got Michael Chiklis to play Deathstroke. That's fantastic. So I'm always delighted and amazed by the voice acting in these things. So Deathstroke turned out really, really well. And what they usually do with the CWC things, and it's free. So you're looking for something to watch, you don't have to pay for it. If you want to see Red Sun, you have to pay for it. You can stream it or buy the DVD. Deathstroke, this first batch of episodes is free. Later on down the line, they'll release a full-length movie which will have more footage, like 20 extra minutes, and then they'll have more episodes on Seed later on down the line, concluding the story. So they released it in different formats. Yeah. But I'm really, really happy with that one. And what else can I plug? Well, if everyone's sitting home and they need stuff to read, I'll plug the most recent comic projects that are out there. The Girl in the Bay from Berger Books, Karen Berger's line of books at Dark Horse. If you like my Vertigo work, I think you will like The Girl in the Bay. It's a very dark, twisty, supernatural time travel story about the nature of our identity. Really, really loved working on that. The opposite end of the spectrum, which I mentioned before, is Impossible Incorporated, which I did with my buddy Mike Cavallaro, wonderful artist. And it's sort of like Fantastic Four meets Doctor Who, big cosmic adventure with this team being led by this 17-year-old girl genius. And it's really a lot of fun. I got to get my sort of Fantastic Four Doctor Who energies out of this story. It's a really fun story. And the collected edition of Moonshadow, the collected edition of Moonshadow from Dark Horse, which is, there have been several collections of Moonshadow over the years. This really is the definitive edition. They did such a beautiful job. And if I was going to pick the 2 or 3 best projects I've ever done, Moonshadow is, depending on the day, it's like number 1 or 2 on the list, you know. So if you like my work and you haven't read Moonshadow, I would say go check it out. Those are my plugs. I'm done. No, I'm not. I forgot. One more plug. I forgot. I was supposed to have a workshop coming up like next weekend or something. That's obviously not happening. But what I do have for anyone that's interested, if you're a writer or a creator, I have a consulting service. If you go to my website and you look up my story consulting section, where I work with people one-on-one. They send me their work, I read it over, we get on Skype or we get on the phone, we dissect the work, and I help them to expand the parameters of their craft and hopefully to make their story even better. So I love working with people that way, working one-on-one. I'm working with a couple of different people right now. And especially in this time when we're all locked in,
Right.
One of the things I've seen is just having something creative to do is so important. Once I start working, I'm okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm lost in the story, or working with someone else. Someone else sends me their work, and we're sitting on the phone and we're talking about it, and we're peeling it apart and putting it back together. It's a great thing to be doing right now. Creativity, to me, is really, Harlan Ellison said, "Writing is a holy chore." It's one of his best lines. And creativity is a spiritual practice for me. It really, really is, because it connects us to something deeper and truer inside ourselves, far beyond the insanity that CNN is shoveling down our throat. And I'm not picking on CNN. I mean, all the media is shoveling down. I call it the CNN reality, but I mean all media. Just 24/7. It's like, be afraid, be very afraid, be afraid, be very afraid. Well, there's a truth to that, but there's also a whole other level of reality that we can access through writing, through painting, through all kinds of art, through spiritual practice. And writing for me is one of those things. Music is one of those things for me as well. So I think it's a great time to, if you're home and you haven't had your chance to write that story or paint that picture or whatever it is, now's the time to do it. Agreed. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, go to my website, jmdmatteis.com, and send me an email.
Awesome. So besides the website, is there anywhere else we can find you on social media?
Oh, you can always find me on Twitter, which is just, Twitter and Facebook are both just my name, JMDeMatteis. And my website. And I think we've talked about this before. I really enjoy social media. I enjoy the chance to connect with the people that read and enjoy my work. Because 99% of the time, those are the only people that reach out to you. Happily, the people that hate your work are not the ones that contact you. And every once in a while, if they do, you can just mute them and make them go away. But I find that the fans out there are just invariably really good and decent, enthusiastic, appreciative people, and I love the connection. And now, I had a lot of conventions lined up for this year. Right. So now the only way that really, for the most part, that we can connect is through social media. Yeah. And so it's a nice thing. I mean, how can you possibly complain about someone coming up to you and saying, "I really love that story. It meant so much to me." Mm-hmm. Right? It's the best thing there is. And I always say, I spend so much time alone in this room with my imaginary friends. I forget that there are actually people out there that are reading this stuff. Yeah. And so when someone has read something and it really means something to them, that wasn't just another story. It touched their heart in some way. That means the world to me. So I love that interaction.
Well, and I'll tell you, it's actually kind of funny that you bring this up. So after our last interview, we had talked about and I bought one of your graphic novels. I've started reading it. I've started reading Creature Commandos.
I didn't think that's what you were going to say. That's really funny. That's really funny.
And I'll tell you, like, I've loved it so far, and it's
so funny.
Being able to sit here and being able to read this, and I was like, oh, I'm going to bring this up. I was like, I'd see that's one.
This is not something that comes up very often. Although they too have popped up in animation on a couple of occasions, which I find astonishing. When I was first starting in the business and first starting at DC, and I was working with Len Wein, who was my dear friend, my editor, and my mentor in the early days in the business. And I still miss him very much. And he was looking for series for Weird War Tales. Those of you that don't know it, there really was once a comic book called Weird War Tales, and for House of Mystery. And I had this idea in my head for a while because I had been selling stories to Weird War Tales, and it's really kind of obvious. Well, Weird War, okay, classic monsters fighting World War II, And I pitched it to Len. I think he came up with the name Creature Commandos, but I came up with the concept. And so we did the series, and I think I did 6 or so of them, and then that was right around when I got offered a contract at Marvel, and I left DC for Marvel for a while. But that's where the Creature Commandos came from. And so it was really early in my career. So the idea, I look back, and the idea that anyone could read those stories, if they're still even coherent, I'm really appreciative that you could enjoy them. That's amazing. I'm really glad. The other series I did at the same time, and this character has kind of come back and stuck around too, is a series for House of Mystery called I, Vampire, with that Andrew Bennett vampire character. So those are the first 2 things I ever created of my own in comics. And on that one, Len came to me and he had the title. He said, "I have a title, I, Vampire. Now go create something." So I came back with that, and those were the first 2 things I'd ever created in comics.
Well, see, that's fantastic. Like I said, it's we'll try to find those little nooks and crannies so that we can talk about it next time.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And that series ran for quite a while, and then they brought it back years later. And then I was amazed when it showed up in some of the on Brave and the Bold. And I actually think Creature Commandos would make a great movie, because it's essentially the Dirty Dozen meets a classic 1940s Frankenstein movie.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So just imagine it like done in black and white with that old Universal Pictures kind of lighting and everything. A World War II movie, monsters, Nazis, the whole thing. I think it could be fantastic.
I agree.
Here's another project for after this is over. So Warner Brothers, if you're listening, I'm ready for the live action Creature Commandos, and I volunteer to write it.
The synergy is happening. The synergy.
That's right.
It's
Right.
happening.
It'd be very weird if all these things actually happen, wouldn't it?
I'm telling you, we're going to follow up with you a year from now. We're going to see how much of an effect we had.
That's right.
I hate to say this, but we have got to go. But it has been just a genuine pleasure, as always, talking with you, JM. We could literally talk with you for hours, but then we wouldn't have a reason for you to come back. So
That's true.
So that
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk to you guys.
It's a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for what you do. Incidentally, if any of you listening out there would like to hear more of our interviews with JM, they are available on our SoundCloud and iTunes pages. Most recently, we did talk with JM about his work on the new Deathstroke series and the DC animation movie Red Sun, where we go a little more in depth than we did today. But thank you so much for joining us.
A pleasure.
Stay safe, sir. And
take care, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. So that was great. That's great. As always, it's the
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, we can. I wanted to throw that at you. Absolutely. Well, we'll have to sign off with you there, Mr. DeMatteis, but be in touch. Great interview, sir. Thank you so much. All right, you too. Bye-bye. And you viewer out there, stay with us, because in a little bit, we'll have our next segment, final segment of the Just Us Nerds Panel of Power, where we're going to be talking with Miss Tatiana Dektar, actress, a veritable Lon Chaney Jr., if you will. Yes. We have seen her on several YouTube shows, Superpower Beatdown, Heroes with Issues, where she has portrayed numerous superheroes and supervillains. So be sure to check that out. So until then, Chris, what do we want them to do?
Make sure you're staying clean, stay socially distant. You know, you got to take care of yourself. And we can do this together, even if we're alone.
This has been Chris and Jay for the Just Us Nerds podcast.